What are the NFC wide receiver depth charts looking like ahead of the NFL draft, and what does that mean for fantasy football as teams try to create their pecking order for the 2022 production season? It's time to find out right here and right now as we start another episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Our Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for SportingNews.com. We've turned the corner from free agency heading into the draft. We'll talk a lot more about the draft here soon on Locked On Fantasy Football. We got to finish our series, however, of looking at the depth chart updates, essentially looking at where teams stand at every offensive skill position. We've gone through the running backs. We've gone through the tight ends. Now it's time to wrap up the wide receivers, looking at all the teams in the NFC. That means on deck is the quarterback, so we'll get to the AFC quarterback situations there. We know a lot of big changes there, including Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson. And then we'll get to the NFC changes there quite a bit on that side. So a lot to break down there with the quarterbacks, more intriguing than expected with the movement there. But wide receiver definitely was very active. A lot of teams changing their narratives here in free agency, setting up different things they have to do in the draft. So we'll break down all the teams in the NFC for you, where they stand here with their wide receiver core and what that means for fantasy football for now. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We are free and available to you on all platforms. All right, let's dive right in, shall we, and look at the Arizona Cardinals. That's how we do it. When we go around a conference, we go in alphabetical order by team name. So Arizona Cardinals all the way through the Washington Commanders. So 16 teams analysis by the time we're done with the show. So packing a lot in as we do with these offseason scouting reports. Arizona, DeAndre Hopkins coming back from the injury, missed time last year with Kyler Murray. He should be good to go as their number one. Rondell Moore slides up to number two. Here, Antoine Wesley, he had a few moments there catching some touchdowns from Amari last season. He's right now number three. Why is this the case? Well, Christian Kirk signed that big contract with the Jaguars. A.J. Green has not been retained here by the Cardinals, and we talked about them investing to bring back Zach Ertz and Max Williams at tight end. So big opportunity for Rondell Moore. He flashed a little bit, had one big game, but that's about it. Last season, they teased that he was going to have a big role in this offense. Didn't quite hope it happened right away, but you look at Hopkins behind him. I mean, there's a big opportunity for Rondell Moore to be used as a frequent target here for Murray. Wesley, we know, can go up and get the ball in the red zone. Moore, they probably will use a little bit of 12 personnel as well with Ertz and Williams, but when they go 11, you figure Wesley will be on the outside and Moore will be used kind of the slot here. So big opportunity for Rondell Moore. They got to get him the consistent touches and targets here to trust him in fantasy football. It can't be just an occasional trick play near the goal line there where he gets a shovel pass or a handoff. He has to be a consistent part of what they do in the receiving game as well with decent targets. So with Christian Kirk gone, with A.J. Green gone, I think there's an opportunity here for Moore to expand his role. Wesley is okay, but he's just a guy. I could see the Cardinals upgrading there at wide receiver. Andy Isabella is still on the roster. He's a very speedy guy, quick as well, slot candidate. But it really falls down after that. You have Greg Dortch there of Wake Forest, and then you have Andre Bacchelia from Washington. So really very thin depth chart behind Hopkins and Moore. So really looking at the Cardinals making a move here in the draft to add a wide receiver, mainly a guy that can be on the outside to complement what Hopkins and Moore can do. So a big possession type that has some speed skills as well to stretch the field makes a lot of sense for the Cardinals so they can use Moore on the inside here. Isabella has not proved to be a very good slot option here, so Moore definitely profiles like that with his size, speed, and quickness. All right, let's go to the Atlanta Falcons. This one, thinner than what we just saw with the Cardinals. Calvin Ridley on suspension there for the gambling. there that the NFL found out about. Julio Jones is not coming back. Traded to the Titans. The Titans released him. You don't really have much else. Russell Gage moved on in free agency to the rival Buccaneers. So Olamide Zaccheaus is now their top wide receiver, and he's kind of a slot guy, versatile type player. Kadero Hodge, they have Frank Darby, Auden Tate, the former Bengal, Chad Hansen, and Austin Trammell. This is their wide receiver depth chart. Yeah, nothing to see here. This is one of the worst wide receiver depth charts they've ever seen here. And it would be a lot different if Calvin Ridley was the number one and in the mix here for now your new quarterback, Marcus Mariota. So I don't know what we've done to the Falcons passing game, but it's unrecognizable just from 2 years ago when it was Ridley, Jones, and Ryan. Now it is Mariota, Zaccheaus, Hodge, Darby, and Tate. And then Kyle Pitts looking really good. We talked about him when we broke down the tight end look here in the NFC, that Kyle Pitts can dominate targets on this team for sure. So they got to get some wide receiver in the draft at this point. I mean, it doesn't matter about Ridley coming back or not next season. They need to get some help. Maybe one or two options here. One for the outside who can potentially be the big playmaker and be the alpha that Julio Jones was, and then go get a complimentary slot player here and just kind of wait for Ridley here in 2023, assuming he's going to be back in the fold and they won't look to move him again there. It just really depends how they're sitting at the wide receiver. But a year lost is hard to recover from that and get back and be at a high level. So something the Falcons will keep in mind. But definitely the Cardinals and Falcons, the first two teams we're talking about, need some help here. The Panthers seem to be in okay shape here as the third team we're talking about in the NFC at their wide receiver depth chart. So they got DJ Moore. We got an extension. Good for him. Robbie Anderson has still been in the mix here, but they thought they might move on from him in that contract, but he's there. You also have Rashard Higgins. Remember him, the versatile Browns receiver, can line up a little bit of everywhere. So an option there in the slot if they want him or they want to move around more as well. They could also look at a big slot there, Terrace Marshall Jr. from LSU. They thought they might see him a little bit more on the outside, but it looks like he's a guy that big slot potential here in this offense. A little bit different with Joe Brady not there anymore, with Ben McAdoo there, but this is a good opportunity for Higgins. I think it hurts Anderson because it's more of a dink and dunk type offense. So it could really help Marshall have a bigger role here. But DJ Moore, pretty solid spot. He returns with Sam Darnold at quarterback, so limited there. So I think the Panthers could be in the mix for another receiver potentially here. It rounds out with Brandon Zylstra and Shi Smith here. Shi Smith actually had an arrest here in the offseason, so we'll see how that plays out. But they liked his upside a little bit on this team. So, again, the Panthers, I think, are on the fence. I don't think it's a must-address situation here with Moore and Anderson and Higgins, and also the depth of Marshall in year two. But definitely they could maybe have some depth upgrades here for Sam Darnold going forward in 2022. All right, let's look at the Chicago Bears. I really like the top of this depth chart, Darnell Mooney with Justin Fields. I mean, Darnell Mooney already feels like a wide receiver two that we're going to go after pretty aggressively here. He took over as the one with Allen Robinson fading last year. There wasn't much else. Now they've rebooted around him. They have Byron Pringle, the former Chief. He's now their number two. They have Equanimeous St. Brown, there of the Packers. He's moved over in the division, staying with his brother, Amon-Ra, for the Lions. You have Isaiah Coulter. Remember we said the Texans had moved on from a couple guys, Kiki Kuti being one of them. But Coulter is another one, their Hawaii product. So now he is in the Bears camp. And they have Daz Newsome. I liked him there coming out of North Carolina and as a potential playmaker for them, but it didn't materialize yet. So I think they'll be in the market for a wide receiver as well. I mean, you can't really go in with Byron Pringle, as well as he's been producing for the Chiefs in a specific role here. I don't think he's a guy that you hang your hat on as a number two. But Darnell Mooney looks like a clear dominant number one here. The good connection with Fields, the Fields' big arm, no more Robinson. I think he can be a complete receiver here, and he's going to have a lot of nice appeal as a wide receiver too with upside. Finally, we'll look at the Dallas Cowboys in this segment. We know that they moved on from Amari Cooper, traded him to the Browns. So good news for CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup. The targets are going to be more streamlined to them here with Dalton Schultz at tight end. They add James Washington for some depth. They lose Cedric Wilson as well. He signs with the Dolphins here. So complete reboot of this receiving core behind Lamb and Gallup. James Washington, Noah Brown is still around, and Simi Fioco, a Stanford product, he's still there on this depth chart. But all lining up nicely for Lamb and Gallup. They couldn't have asked for a better offseason with Wilson and Cooper and Turner disappearing from this mix, I'll say, because this is good. Because then you have a three-man pecking order between Lamb, Gallup, and Dalton Schultz at tight end with Dak Prescott. You'll take that all the time. So really beneficiary here is the situation with Gallup. We thought he was gone as a free agent, but instead they moved Cooper. So now he becomes at least their number 2 target behind CeeDee Lamb, who's clear-cut number 1. So sometimes it's good to have just enough mouths to feed and not too many. Schultz kind of threw a wrench into things last year as a big target for Dak Prescott, but now Lamb, Gallup, Schultz is how it sets up minus Cooper. All right, we still have another 11 teams to talk about when we look at our NFC wide receiver depth charts here on today's show. We know football season is going to be a wait here before it comes around again. There's going to be some action over the NFL draft. We know college basketball, however, has its brightest moment this weekend. After months of playing, college hoops has determined the top teams for the Final Four. Those would be Duke and North Carolina, who play each other, and Villanova and Kansas loaded here to determine this year's national championship over the weekend and early next week. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it, BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues when they're in action this season. And not just basketball, for college or the NBA right now, BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use a mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Check it out. It's never been easier to get in on the action there at BetOnline. All right, we will continue the show breaking down the other NFC wide receiver depth charts. We'll start again with the Lions here in our next segment. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Make sure you're also following Locked On NFL. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let us continue here looking at the Lions. The Lions have a pretty clear depth chart. They're in the market for another wide receiver potentially. I don't think they're going to take one at number 2 overall in the draft, but Amon-Ra St. Brown really came down the stretch, finished as a wide receiver 2. Really impressed with what St. Brown did in that offense. Really settled in nicely. It didn't matter who the quarterback was between Jared Goff and David Blau and Nick Boyle. It didn't matter. Or Tim Boyle, I should say. We don't even care about the Lions quarterback if St. Brown produces like that. So Amon-Ra looks better and more involved than his brother to produce right away. So that's great news. The USC product. USC just keeps on marching out these underrated receivers, the Robert Woods and Juju Smith-Schuster types. Everyone seems to keep producing here. Nelson Aguilar even had moments again for the Patriots last season. So St. Brown coming out of that pipeline and did really well here for the Lions and is their clear number 1 when you look at his overall versatility and playmaking skills. DJ Chark, a pretty good number 2, picked him up as a good value there from the Jaguars. He had that scary injury there with his ankle against the Bengals on Thursday Night Football last year, but came back. Now looks pretty good. So Chark, good flyer to take on, cheaper flyer, and they can complement one another very well, Chark and St. Brown. So Chark, a bit of a sleeper with the volume the Lions figure to have in the passing game, but their defense still being a work in progress. They also still have Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond, a pair of former Titans. They're in the mix here. And Quintez Cephas, don't forget about him. He was putting up some numbers here early last season before St. Brown came on, before he went down with an injury there. So we'll look at the Lions. This wide receiver core, not as bad as it seems, but St. Brown and Chark can be a good 1-2 punch there, given how much they can throw. And we'll see if it's with a rookie quarterback or one of these veterans, still Jared Goff as the starter. Let's go to the Packers. We know their depth chart is missing someone pretty big. It's Devontae Adams. He's now with the Raiders. We broke down how that passing game looks with Adams and Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow. Well, this one is led by now Allen Lazard, because Marquez Valdes-Scantling also moved on. So Allen Lazard is your number 1 Packers wide receiver, followed by Randall Cobb, and no relation to Aaron Rodgers, Amari Rodgers. You also have Malik Taylor, Juwan Winfrey, who's flashed a little bit, and Rico Gafford. He was with the Cowboys for a little bit there. So that's your depth chart right now for the Packers. So you lose Adams, you lose MVS, you get at least Robert Tunyon back at tight end, but this is a situation worth monitoring. Lazard has a big opportunity here. We know Cobb has been okay, and he's got a good connection still after all these years with Aaron Rodgers, but he's still a limited player here. But Lazard, we know, has shown a little flash here. If he can get some consistent targets, there is some trust factor there from Aaron Rodgers. So we know for sure the Packers, 2 late first-round picks, like the Chiefs with that deal, moving Adams to the Raiders. I think they'll target one of those receivers late. It's Jahan Dotson, maybe Drake London falls there to that spot from USA, the latest guy from USC. You look at other options there, including Treylon Burks of Arkansas. Maybe they go after Christian Watson of North Dakota State, a big riser here up draft board. So the Packers definitely in the market to draft a wide receiver early in the draft, especially with 2 first-rounders and 2 second-rounders in the wheelhouse of a pretty good wide receiver class. Let's go to the Los Angeles Rams. There's no Odell Beckham Jr. in the mix, and I doubt that's going to happen now because Cooper Kupp has a new number 2. It's Allen Robinson, a former number 1 of the Bears. So it surprised some people when they went after Robinson, but it meant that they were going to move Robert Woods, and they did. So Robert Woods is now playing for the Titans. Odell Beckham Jr., maybe he'll return to the Browns, but right now, Allen Robinson is the beneficiary playing off Kupp and the attention he gets. That's a pretty good veteran receiver, 1-2 punch there to have with Matthew Stafford. So interesting landing spot for Robinson for sure. Not a wide receiver needy team that screamed it, but now he's the replacement veteran for Woods and Beckham. As they get some return for Woods there from the Titans, and Beckham, the knee injury coming off the ACL is definitely a concern there. So they go with Robinson, who's had a knee in his past that has hurt him there, but good complementary receiver. They're almost co-number 1. So Cooper Kupp, we know, is a dominant number 1, but Robinson also has that profile from Jacksonville and Chicago. They have Van Jefferson still hanging on as number 3, trying to carve out some relevance. Ben Skowronek is your number 4 still. Tutu Atwell missed all of last season with an injury. I like this kid out of Louisville, can make some plays. They got Brandon Powell and J.J. Koski rounding out the depth chart. So, again, Robinson looks like a wide receiver 2 right now. Kupp is going to stay as a wide receiver 1. Van Jefferson has some appeal, maybe as a wide receiver 3 and streamer, but interesting landing spot for Robinson. We thought it was questionable until they decided not to pursue Beckham and move on from Woods shortly after. So interesting decision there to go for the cheaper contract in a sense because they paid Woods a lot of money. They go with Robinson here now. Let's go to the Minnesota Vikings, and that rounds out our look at the NFC North teams. The Justin Jefferson show is just getting warmed up. He's going to year 3, a lot of big seasons there ahead for Justin Jefferson. He already had 2 in this league, so clearly an alpha, elite wide receiver 1. Adam Thielen could be fading a little bit with his injury and age. You have KJ Osborne, flash definitely as a number 3 receiver last year. Emir Smith-Marset is the next guy on the depth chart, the guy from Iowa that has some big play potential. And BC Johnson, otherwise known as Ola BC Johnson, he's the guy that rounds out the Vikings depth chart here for the new coach Kevin O'Connell, working with Kirk Cousins. So I don't see too much of a change here. Jefferson's going to still be a dominant number 1. Thielen continues his fade as a wide receiver 2. And Osborne has some moments as a wide receiver 3. I don't know if they'll shake it up too much, but we will see. The Vikings are certainly in the market for a first-round wide receiver. They're right in the wheelhouse of what Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson of Ohio State, James Williams, also Ohio State, transferred to Alabama, are all in the mix there as elite wide receivers where the Vikings could tap into that and pair someone with Jefferson and make Thielen more of a veteran slot delegated receiver here. And that would obviously change his value while Jefferson's would continue to shoot up with his production. All right, let's look at the New Orleans Saints. They've got Michael Thomas. He's happy, back and forth, adjusted his contract, so he's good to go here with Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton as their top 2 quarterbacks here. Marquez Callaway flashed quite a bit last year. It was wide receiver 3 value without Thomas. Helped a little by Thomas coming back with the attention he gets, but hurt a little bit also by not getting the same type of volume in terms of targets. Traquan Smith still hanging on here as the number 3 that could replace him. Deontay Harris, and you have Kawan Baker, and then Kevin White is still around here in the league, so he's on the step chart. But when you look at the Saints here, some more upgrades can be done here, but we'll see if they use a first-round pick on a wide receiver. There's a potential for that. We mentioned Olave, Wilson, and Williams, that wheelhouse in the mid to late first round. The Saints would certainly be in that mix with the Vikings. Let's go to the Giants here, and let's see what they're looking like. Kenny Golladay technically is their number one. He disappointed in his first season coming over from the Lions as a free agent last year. So we'll see if he can rebound, but some injury issues were there, getting a little bit older. The quarterback situation, Daniel Jones, didn't quite help. So this is a big make or break year for Golladay going forward with the Giants or another team. Sterling Shepard, Mr. Reliable, is number two. You have Kadarius Toney, the first-round pick from last year, big play guy. If he can stay on the field, watch out in this offense with Brian Daboll. He could be Stephon Diggs here for Daniel Jones. So let's see how it plays out. And then you have Darius Slayton still hanging around here as a big play threat. You also have Richie James in the mix, the former 49er. Remember him? He had one big Thursday night game there when the 49ers had a big outbreak and nobody could play. Well, he's on the Giants. You also have Forster, who's a guy that had some time there with the Bills, and so a guy that there's familiarity with Brian Daboll. He's around. You also have C.J. Board and Colin Johnson rounding out this depth chart. So still a lot to figure out. Rather deep here when you look at Golladay, Shepard, Toney, and Slayton being your top four here for the Giants. So we can see a lot of 11 personnel and stretching the field quite a bit here with Daboll as the head coach. We'll talk about the final five teams here in the NFC and their wide receiver depth charts in our final segment. But don't forget, we're going to be here all offseason for you, breaking down the biggest stories there that are pertinent to fantasy football. Can't wait to keep bringing it to you, and we'll be right there, and we'll continue there with our quarterback depth chart looks, and then we'll go in depth with the draft and keep it going, and then we'll get to our team previews again. So we'll do a way to look at every team as many times as we can when the analysis is there to look at. So looking forward to it all off-season long. Locked On Fantasy Football, not just for your in-season advice there with their lineups and waiver pickups, but also all off-season long to help you build to dominating your draft here in 2022. All right, it is time to close the show here, looking at the wide receiver depth charts in the NFC. We still have 5 more teams to talk about. We'll go from the Giants in the NFC East to the Eagles. Let's look at their depth chart right now. Devonta Smith, first-round pick out of Alabama, the Heisman Trophy winner, clear dominant number one here. Zach Pascal was signed from the Colts. Remember, there's a connection between Nick Sirianni and Pascal, both being on the Colts at the same time. So the head coach goes for Pascal. You also have Quez Watkins, who's flashed as a big player. So Pascal has some slot versatility, some possession skills. So Watkins is the big field stretcher. So Smith, Pascal, and Watkins. Then you have Jalen Reagor on the way down here. They need to look to replace him. Maybe it's in-house with Watkins and Pascal and what they can get out of those two guys. But Jalen Reagor certainly is already looking like a first-round bust for this team, and a big reason why they went back to the well with Devonta Smith last year. Then, of course, there's Greg Ward hanging around. He's been valuable at some points. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside is also around, and John Hightower. So might have to cut bait on Reagor and J-Jaw and Hightower, some guys that they've held on to quite a bit because of their draft statuses, but now they can rebound here with Smith as their clear number one for Jalen Hurts, with Pascal and Watkins having designated roles here in this offense. The 49ers passing game, pretty simple. Deebo Samuel, the hybrid do-everything guy, is your top wide receiver. Brandon Ayuk is right behind him. Jawan Jennings, they really liked some of his skill set and some of the plays he made for them down the stretch and into the playoffs last year. So he's your number 3 right now. Then they have Keyshawn Johnson, not the former Buccaneer and the Jet and the ESPN host, but Keyshawn, spelled in a different way, the former Cardinal. We knew he was going to have to move on at some point. So a little bit of a depth player there. They also have Ray McLeod for the return game to help there, and Austin Mack as another option from Ohio State. So definitely some options there, but Samuel Ayuk in position to dominate along with George Kittle there as the top 3 targets for San Francisco, whether it's Jimmy Garoppolo or Trey Lance. Seattle still has DK Metcalf. They didn't move him. There's been a lot of rumors that teams would go after Metcalf as he's in line for a big contract. That would signal that the Seahawks are in a, quote, fire sale here. But DK is still on Seattle, can help maybe the next quarterback here that's going to start. It's not going to be Drew Lock, folks. I mean, it's nice that Drew Lock came back in the return for Russell Wilson, but DK Metcalf, let's stay tuned. Hopefully there'll be a better wide receiver quarterback situation for him to produce. Tyler Lockett, there was talk of the Seahawks moving on from him, but he's on the team right now. You also have Freddie Swain and D. Eskridge there, two young players, as well as Penny Hart and Aaron Fuller, a local product there out of the University of Washington. So not a lot behind Metcalf and Lockett. We'll see if that stays the same here going forward. Freddie Swain has been a pretty good receiver for them overall, given his limited usage playing off Metcalf and Lockett, but definitely an upgrade could be had there. And also don't sleep on D. Eskridge, who has some big play capabilities as well there on this bench. So I think the Seahawks will probably stay status quo here with their wide receivers. The Buccaneers had the big change. We'll talk about that real quickly, that Bruce Arians has been bounced upstairs to senior consultant here. So the offensive coordinator, Byron Leftwich, will remain that role. You have Todd Bowles taking over. This is what the team has at wide receiver, very familiar. You have Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, dominant two starting receivers there. Russell Gage comes over to the Falcons to be their potential number 3 to replace Antonio Brown. You also have Tyler Johnson as well, has some slot characteristics. They also brought back Brashad Perriman. Also have Cyril Grayson, Scotty Miller, and a draft pick, Jalen Darden. So quite a few players vying for the key roles, but they went out and got Gage to be the main complement to Godwin, Evans, and in that inside passing game. Evans being on the outside is the speed, size threat, and Godwin being the slot guy for Brady. So Gage is a good complement to those two and has a good chance to start and see a lot of action here and get decent targets, especially if Rob Gronkowski doesn't return and they're limited tight end with Cameron Brate and what they can do there. Gage should step into a big role here, the 11 personnel. All right, the last team we'll talk about is the Washington Commanders. Yep, the Commanders. Hard to get used to that name, but it is here to stay, and I think we're locked into it now. The Washington Commanders have Terry McLaurin as their number 1. Their last year free agent prize, Curtis Samuel, couldn't stay healthy there with their reunion for Ron Rivera and Scott Turner, so he's right now the number 2. They have Diami Brown, a nice big playmaker out of the other Carolina, North Carolina, who can stretch the field a little bit and make some plays. So the door's open because Samuel can't quite stay healthy. Someone needs to complement McLaurin here to deflect some coverage attention off him and play off that as well. You also have Cam Sims, who's had some moments there playing off McLaurin. You have another guy named Dax Milne. Yeah, one of the best names overall in sports. Dax Milne trying to hold on. No relation to E.E. Milne, who or whoever did the Pooh books. I don't think Dax wrote those books here, but yeah, that's who's on the 5th of the depth chart. And you have Antonio Gandy Golden as well. So our favorite hyphenated name, Gandy Golden. They're not to be confused with Antonio Gibson, who has made the transition, the former wide receiver, into pure running back and feature mode here for the Commanders. So really a lot left to be desired there. Samuel just can't stay healthy. We've seen that going back to Carolina. So they're going to have to dress a little bit. I think Diami Brown can be an occasional big playmaker. Sims has that potential as well, but they'll probably readdress the situation. And also, interesting that Kelvin Harmon, remember him? I thought he had an opportunity there with McLaurin to be their 2 starters for a while coming out of NC State. Hasn't quite been healthy here for the Commanders. So, again, they're looking for some punch here. Maybe Brown will provide it. Maybe it's healthy. Samuel will bring it. But don't be surprised if they seek some more refuge in the draft to boost their numbers here with Carson Wentz taking over quarterback. All right, there you have it. There's a look at the NFC wide receiver depth chart. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. So we finished the wide receiver depth charts here, AFC, NFC. That means we'll start on the quarterbacks, looking at the AFC quarterback depth charts to close the week, barring any big breaking news here to close things on Locked On Fantasy Football. Now make your second listen, Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with inside analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. For Locked On Fantasy Football, for our look at the NFC wide receiver depth charts, this has been Vinnie Iyer. Have a great day, and we'll see you to wrap up the week tomorrow with a look at the AFC quarterback situations around the league.